So I read all the readings and listened to the podcast that you gave us. Um, I want to touch a few different topics that stood out to me. From the reading of We Gonna Be Alright by Jeff Chang is Diversity for White People. When he talks about how when he talks about how diversity is important when a school is predominantly white and wants to seem diversified. They use black people when it is convenient for them. That part was my opinion. But what I mean by that is after reading this and the example that he gave about how there was a university and the university, like everything advertised, pictures, everything about the university just had all white students, a whole lot of white people. And a student ended up complaining. So the school photoshopped a picture and just threw a black person in it. And just because they wanted to seem diversified, because diversity wasn't showing up the way that they were advertising their school, basically. Another thing that stood out was how Chang mentioned racial capitalism, which is like whites who value diversity so much that they decided to fake it. It was a case with Rachel Dolezal, the woman who was born white. She sued Howard University for discriminating against her in part because she was white, but then went to lead the Spokane NAACP as a black identifying woman. Like, that's so mind-blowing. Another story was of Michael Derrick Hudson, a white poet who wrote under the name of a high school classmate, Yi Fing Chow, an attempt to have his writing recognized by diversity-minded judges. So, different things come about when you talk about diversity. Those were just a couple of examples. I feel like this reading ties into This Land, the podcast, because they took the Indians' land, them, as in they, I mean the white people, took the Indians' land because it was convenient for them at the time. I listened to another podcast where it talked about slaves and cotton and slaveholders, where the slaveholders had more slave workers than there was factories, cotton field, and businesses combined, which once again was convenient for them at the time. So, is diversity for white people? That is a good question. And like I keep on saying in this podcast, diversity is only for white people when it's convenient. Because the examples that I use, you could see where nobody was worried about being diversified until it was convenient for them. And I mean convenient as in, as far as schools bringing good publicity because you are diversified versus being a predominantly white school without much diversity. And those type of schools get bad publicity, or they try to say that they're racist or some type of racism is going on because they're predominantly white. So diversity is for white people when it is convenient. And I feel like Chang's book, We Gonna Be Alright, the chapter is Diversity for White People, explains that. And the podcast This Land, it explains that because they took their land just because, once again, like I said, because it was convenient for them at the time. And then having all these black people as cotton pickers and as workers And they had more black people than they even knew what to do with. Like, all of this ties in together. And it makes me pretty mad. I mean, I only have 5 minutes to touch these topics, but I feel like diversity is only for white people when it's convenient.